The tradition of birthday parties has a pretty interesting history, mixing ancient customs, religious practices, and cultural evolution. Here's a quick rundown. Ancient origins. Ancient Egyptians. The earliest recorded birthday celebrations come from ancient Egypt, but they were mainly for pharaohs. They celebrated the birth of a pharaoh's coronation, symbolizing their rebirth as a god, not the actual birthday. Ancient Greeks. The Greeks borrowed the idea but added a twist. They celebrated birthdays of gods and goddesses. They would offer cakes with candles to Artemis, the goddess of the moon, to make the cake glow like the moon and send prayers. Roman influence. The Romans were the first to celebrate the birthdays of ordinary people, not just royalty. They held lavish parties with food, gifts, and festivities to honor the individual. However, only men's birthdays were celebrated publicly. Women's birthdays became common much later. Religious impact. Early Christians initially avoided birthday celebrations, seeing them as pagan rituals linked to astrology and superstition. Over time, the Church softened its stance. By the Middle Ages, Christian birthday celebrations became more accepted, often linked to the feast day of the saint someone was named after. Modern birthday parties. The idea of birthday parties as we know them, with cake, candles, gifts, and social gatherings, became popular in the 18th and 19th centuries, especially in Europe and America. The tradition of putting candles on cakes reportedly came from Germany. Children would have Kinderfest, children's festivals, where cakes had candles to symbolize the light of life. Summary. Birthday parties evolved from religious and royal ceremonies into social celebrations that emphasize personal milestones, community, and joy. Today, they're a mix of ancient symbolism, cultural traditions, and personal fun. In the ancient world, not all days were created equal. There were the days appointed by the Most High, the modim, set-apart times of worship, covenant, and remembrance. And then, there were the days chosen by men. Days not commanded. Days that seemed innocent. Days that opened the door to destruction. Let's examine 3 key moments in Scripture where men celebrated what we now understand as man's day, and how judgment followed. First, Job's sons. In Job chapter 1, we read that Job's sons feasted, every one on his day. These were not YHWH's appointed feast days. They were personal celebration days, most likely birthdays. In the original Hebrew, the phrase points to each son having his own, yom, his own day. It was during one of these feasts that a great wind struck the house, and all of Job's children were killed. These personal feast days, which mirror what we now call birthdays, had no basis in YHWH's calendar. In fact, the custom of birthday celebrations traces back to ancient pagan cultures. In Roman and Greek societies, birthdays were linked to astrology, personal destiny, and the worship of household gods. Even in Egypt, birthdays were far more than a party. They were sacred rites of identity and divinity. Which brings us to Pharaoh. In Genesis chapter 40, Pharaoh celebrates his birthday, and throws a feast for all his servants. But this is no casual party. In Egyptian culture, the birthday of the king was not just a celebration of life. It was the day the pharaoh was ritually honored as a divine being, the living god of Egypt. On his birthday, Pharaoh had the power of life and death. He restored the chief cupbearer. And he executed the chief baker. This was not just a decision. It was a divine act, at least in the eyes of the people. Pharaoh's birthday was a pagan ritual that reinforced his status as a god-king. A counterfeit of the true kingship of the Most High. And long before Pharaoh, there was Cain. In Genesis chapter 4, we're told that, in the course of time, literally, after days, Cain and Abel brought offerings to YHWH. Cain's offering was rejected. And instead of repenting, Cain became enraged. He murdered his brother. This day of offering was not one of YHWH's appointed times. There is no record of a command or instruction. Cain brought an offering on his own terms, in his own time. And for that, he was cursed. He was marked. He became a wanderer. What connects all 3 events? Each man, Cain, Pharaoh, Job's sons, was involved in celebrating or honoring a day that was not sanctified by YHWH. Each event involved elevation of self, ritual, or man-centered celebration. And each ended in judgment. Today, we live in a culture where man's days are celebrated above the Most High's. Birthdays, anniversaries, national holidays, all often rooted in traditions that have nothing to do with righteousness or truth. The birthday party, for example, with candles, wishes, and cakes, comes straight out of pagan Rome and Greece. It was believed that evil spirits visited people on their birthdays, and the candles and noise were meant to protect them. Wishes made over flames were whispered to gods. These are not harmless traditions. They are echoes of rituals that once enthroned men as gods, and defied the Creator. When we look at Scripture with open eyes, we see a pattern. The Most High never commanded us to celebrate our own lives. He called us to remember His works, His deliverance, His appointed times. Man's day brings pride, self-exaltation, and often, judgment. But why HWH's days bring life, covenant, and blessing? The question is, whose day will you celebrate? In chapter 34, verse 41 of the Testament of Solomon, King Solomon continues his interrogation of a group of female demons. Each one steps forward to describe her powers and the ways she afflicts humankind. When the seventh spirit speaks, she identifies herself with a brief but chilling statement. I am the worst, and I make you worse off than you were, because I impose the bonds of Artemis. This is the entirety of verse 41. Though short, the line is dense with meaning. The phrase, I am the worst, positions this spirit as especially dangerous among the group. She claims not only to bring harm but to worsen an already bad condition, suggesting that her influence is deeply corrupting or intensifying in nature. Her destructive role is then linked directly to the bonds of Artemis. The use of the word bonds likely refers to restraints, afflictions, or magical bindings, a form of spiritual or supernatural control. In ancient magical and religious texts, bonds often symbolize curses, physical ailments, emotional torments, or even possession. The striking element here is the reference to Artemis, a well-known goddess from Greek mythology. Artemis was traditionally worshipped as a virgin huntress, a protector of young women, and a goddess associated with the moon and childbirth. But in this text, her name is not honored. Instead, it is used as a source of destructive power. The demon claims to operate by means of Artemis's bonds, which implies either that she uses the authority of Artemis or that Artemis herself has been reinterpreted as a source of affliction. In the Testament of Solomon, this kind of reference is common. The text blends figures from Greek, Jewish, and other traditions into a single supernatural system. Pagan deities like Artemis are not treated as gods, but as names associated with demonic forces or cosmic powers that can harm people unless subdued. So, in this verse, Artemis is not described in detail, nor is her mythology discussed. Instead, her name is invoked as a source of magical or spiritual harm. The demon identifies with her power, not as a follower, but as one who uses the destructive force that the name Artemis represents in this context. In summary, verse 41 uses the name of Artemis to illustrate the dangerous influence of a demonic spirit. It reflects how ancient writers, especially those from early Jewish or Christian backgrounds, reinterpreted well-known pagan figures as part of a darker spiritual world. The verse is a compact example of how religious texts from late antiquity often redefined old gods as harmful forces to be resisted or overcome. The Bible records very few instances of birthday celebrations, and the ones it does mention are closely tied to death or judgment. This is especially evident in the stories of Cain, Pharaoh, and Herod. In Genesis chapter 4, verse 3, it says, "And in the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground." The phrase, "in the course of time," comes from the Hebrew words, miqks yemim, which can be interpreted as, at the end of days, or, at the completion of a cycle of days. While it is not explicitly called a birthday, some scholars suggest that it could indicate a commemorative day marking Cain's life or an annual event. What follows this offering is critical. God accepts Abel's offering but not Cain's. Cain becomes angry and, shortly after, murders his brother Abel. The first recorded act of worship after this symbolic day ends in death. If it was a celebration of Cain's origin or identity, it became a moment of judgment rather than honor. In Genesis chapter 40, verses 20 to 22, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, holds a feast on his birthday. The text says, "On the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all his servants and lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker." One is restored to his position. The other is executed. On Pharaoh's birthday, a moment meant to celebrate his life and power, he chooses to exercise judgment and take a life. The day becomes a symbol of both favor and death, depending on Pharaoh's decision. In the New Testament, in Matthew chapter 14, verses 6 through 10, King Herod's birthday is marked by another feast. During the celebration, the daughter of Herodias dances before the king and his guests. Pleased by her, Herod promises to give her whatever she asks. Prompted by her mother, she requests the head of John the Baptist. Though distressed, Herod honors his promise. John is beheaded in prison, and his head is brought on a platter. Again, a birthday becomes the setting for murder. a righteous man loses his life during a celebration of a king's birth. In each of these cases, Cain, Pharaoh, and Herod, a symbolic or literal birthday is connected to a grave outcome. Worship, judgment, or personal desire overtakes the meaning of life and turns it into a moment of death. The pattern is striking. When man centers celebration on himself, the result is often the loss of another. The scriptures do not present these birthdays as joyful or righteous occasions, but rather as turning points where what begins as a celebration ends in bloodshed and divine consequence. In the Testament of Solomon, a powerful warning is given about a spirit who says, "I am the worst, and I make you worse off than you were, because I impose the bonds of Artemis." This spirit identifies herself with Artemis, the ancient Greek goddess. She doesn't claim to heal or help, she says outright that her purpose is to make things worse. Her bonds are not blessings, they are spiritual chains that bring suffering. But what many people don't realize is that Artemis is not just any goddess. She is the twin sister of Apollo, one of the most worshipped gods in Greek and Roman culture. While Artemis was associated with the moon, hunting, and childbirth, Apollo was the god of the sun, prophecy, and healing. Together, they were seen as powerful divine twins, representing light and dark, health and death, male and female forces. Apollo, in particular, was worshipped as the god of medicine and healing. The ancient physicians who shaped what we now call modern medicine swore oaths in his name. In the original Hippocratic oath, doctors said, "I swear by Apollo the healer." This means that the spiritual foundation of modern Western medicine is rooted in a vow to a false god, not to the Most High of Israel, but to a pagan deity. Now let us turn to Scripture. In Revelation chapter 9, we are told of a destructive spirit who rises from the bottomless pit during the time of judgment. His name is Abaddon in Hebrew, but in Greek, he is called Apollyon, which means the destroyer. This name, Apollyon, is deeply connected to Apollo. In fact, many early believers understood that the figure of Apollyon was a direct reference to the false god Apollo, now revealed as a demonic force of destruction in the last days. So think about what's being shown to us. In the Testament of Solomon, Artemis, Apollo's sister, is described as bringing spiritual harm. In Revelation, Apollo himself is revealed under the name Apollyon, as a ruler of destruction and torment. And in history, doctors made oaths to this same Apollo, believing he had power over life and health. What does that tell us? It tells us that these ancient gods, which the world calls symbols of light and healing, are actually sources of spiritual bondage and destruction. They are not for our good, they are against us. The world honors them, but the Most High exposes them. As Israelites, we are commanded not to follow after the gods of the nations. In Deuteronomy chapter 32, it says that the Gentiles sacrifice to devils, not to Elohim. This applies to every system built on their gods, even medicine, if it begins with a vow to Apollo. We must return to the Most High as our healer. As it is written in Exodus 15, verse 26, "If you diligently listen to the voice of Yah your Elohim, and do what is right in his eyes, I will put none of these diseases upon you which I brought upon the Egyptians, for I am Yah who heals you." Artemis and Apollo were worshipped as bringers of health and light, but in truth, they represent spiritual darkness. Artemis makes us worse off. Apollo becomes Apollyon, the destroyer. These are not our protectors. They are false powers, exposed by the word of the Most High. Let us not be deceived. Let us seek healing, not from the gods of this world, but from the Creator of heaven and earth, Yah, the Elohim of Israel. In the Testament of Solomon, one of the spirits claims she imposes the bonds of Artemis, and in some manuscripts, she is referred to as Artemis Magos, meaning Artemis the sorceress or magician. This title points directly to her connection with witchcraft and magic, not just as a goddess of nature or the hunt, but as a spiritual force of sorcery and control. Now here's where it gets deeper. In the Greek world, especially in later periods, Artemis began to blend together with other female deities connected to the moon, death, and the underworld, especially Hecate. Hecate was known as the goddess of witchcraft, necromancy, and crossroads. She was often invoked in magical spells, and feared as a spirit of the night. Just like Artemis, she was also linked to the moon, wild animals, and protection of women, but in a darker, more mysterious form. In many cases, Artemis and Hecate were seen as two faces of the same spirit. Artemis was worshipped in public as a goddess of purity and protection. Hecate was invoked in secret rites as a goddess of magic and the underworld. But by the time of the Roman Empire and the early Christian era, these two figures had become deeply intertwined. They were often invoked together in magical texts, especially in spells that involved binding, control, or nighttime rituals. In this form, Artemis was no longer just the hunter or the moon goddess. She was also a spirit of sorcery, operating under names like Arteimus Magos, or even Hecate Artemis. This fusion is especially important to recognize for those who understand spiritual warfare. When the demon in the Testament of Solomon says she makes people worse off by using the bonds of Artemis, and when she is referred to as Arteimus Magos, this is not a neutral or benign figure. This is not the clean, mythological image taught in schools. This is a representation of the same spirit behind witchcraft, feminine spiritual rebellion, and demonic binding. It's no coincidence that this spirit is the twin of Apollo, who in Revelation is revealed under the name Apollyon, the destroyer from the pit. Both Artemis and Apollo are spiritual forces that the Most High unmasks in different ways. Artemis, when seen through the lens of Hecate and magical rites, represents bondage, sorcery, and deception, especially directed toward women and children. Apollo, under the name Apollyon, represents false light and destruction. Together, they are twin deities in Greek religion. But from the perspective of spiritual truth, they are demonic powers, the same kind of gods that Israel was warned not to serve. So yes, Arteimus Magos, the one who brings bonds, is spiritually the same as Hecate, or at least, they are different faces of the same type of unclean spirit. Whether called Artemis or Hecate, the role is the same, to seduce, to bind, and to destroy. As Israel, we are not to fear these names, but we are to discern them. They are not just myths of the past, they are still worshipped today under new names, hidden in entertainment, medicine, feminism, and secret societies. But the Most High has revealed them for what they are. Let us stay watchful, stay clean, and cling to Yah, our true protector and healer. When the Testament of Solomon speaks of a spirit who says, "I impose the bonds of Artemis," that phrase carries deep meaning. In the Greek world, Artemis was not only a goddess of the hunt and the moon, she was also linked to binding and control, especially when she took on the form of Arteimus Magos, the magical or sorceress Artemis. Over time, this figure blended with Hecate, the goddess of witchcraft and the crossroads. Because of that blending, the bonds of Artemis can rightly be understood as the bonds of Hecate, spiritual chains connected to sorcery, enchantment, and the manipulation of human life. Both names describe the same type of power, a binding force that traps people in confusion, fear, or sickness. In ancient magic, Hecate was invoked to bind enemies or to hold souls captive. So when the spirit in Solomon's account claims to use these bonds, she is declaring that her work is to restrain and afflict. For a spiritual Israelite, this is more than mythology. It reveals how the nation's deities operate, through deception and control. These bonds are not physical ropes but spiritual ties, vows, fears, habits, and false beliefs that keep a person from freedom in the Most High. The same power that the Greeks attributed to Artemis or Hecate is still at work today in practices that rely on hidden forces or seek control through ritual. To understand the bonds of Hecate is to recognize the nature of spiritual bondage itself. It is any power that takes authority over the mind or the body apart from the will of Yah. These are the same chains that Yahshua came to break. As it is written in Isaiah 61, "He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and the opening of the prison to them that are bound." So yes, the bonds of Hecate and the bonds of Artemis are the same in essence. They represent the dark side of spiritual influence, the false light that promises power but produces enslavement. Israel must discern this, because freedom comes only from the Most High, not from the powers of magic or the gods of the nations. Let us understand this for what it is, the revelation that what the world calls enlightenment or healing often hides a spirit of bondage. But the covenant of the Most High breaks every chain, and His truth exposes every false god. Throughout history, the birthday celebrations of powerful rulers have often been more than just personal milestones. In both biblical texts and modern political contexts, these events have served as moments of power display, manipulation, and sometimes, death, not of the leader, but of others under their authority. In the Bible, two well-known examples illustrate this pattern. First, in the New Testament, King Herod hosts a grand banquet on his birthday. During this feast, his stepdaughter dances for him, and in a moment of pride and public showmanship, he promises her anything she wants. Urged by her mother, she demands the head of John the Baptist. Though Herod is troubled by the request, he gives the order to have John executed, all to maintain his public image and authority. Here, the birthday celebration becomes the setting for a public display of unchecked power, resulting in the death of a righteous man. A similar moment appears in the Old Testament. In the book of Genesis, Pharaoh of Egypt holds a birthday feast and uses the occasion to make a deadly decision. He restores one servant to his position and executes another. This again shows a leader using a personal celebration to affirm control over life and death, choosing who lives and who dies as part of the spectacle. In both of these biblical accounts, the ruler's birthday becomes a time not of private joy, but of public judgment. These stories reflect a deeper truth, that power, when celebrated too publicly or pridefully, often invites injustice, and those most at risk are not the rulers themselves, but those under their control. This pattern continues in modern times, particularly in authoritarian or highly centralized regimes. In countries like North Korea, the birthdays of leaders such as Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il are treated as national holidays, complete with parades, performances, and compulsory loyalty displays. Around these events, there are often reports, though rarely confirmed, of purges, disappearances, or executions of officials. These acts serve to reinforce the leader's control and remind the population of the cost of disloyalty, just as Herod's birthday reminded his court of his authority, even to the point of killing a prophet. Similarly, under Saddam Hussein in Iraq, the ruler's birthday was a national event. Though not always accompanied by public executions, these periods often saw the arrest or punishment of those seen as threats. Such events were less about celebration and more about consolidating power under the guise of national unity. Even in less extreme contexts, some leaders use their birthdays as opportunities to showcase strength. In Russia, while Vladimir Putin's birthdays are not major public holidays, some critical political moves, including acts of violence or arrests of opposition figures, have taken place near those dates. These moments carry symbolic weight, functioning like modern echo chambers of the biblical pattern. The ruler's birthday becomes a stage on which life and death decisions are made, not necessarily in the open, but with similar implications. This recurring pattern, from ancient scripture to modern statecraft, shows that the ruler's birthday often becomes more than a personal affair. It is a moment of heightened symbolism, a chance to demonstrate dominance, reward loyalty, and eliminate threats. Whether in a palace banquet or a televised celebration, these events reflect how personal milestones of the powerful can be transformed into instruments of control, often at the cost of others' lives. The birthday, then, serves as a mirror. For some, it reflects joy and legacy. For others, especially under unjust rule, it becomes a reminder that power, when mixed with pride and spectacle, can be deadly.